There's a number that can make an ordinary person feel briefly untouchable. $100,000. 6 figures in savings. You see it on a screen, maybe in a brokerage account, maybe in a high-yield savings account, maybe split across a 401k, an IRA, and a checking account you've been trying not to raid. And for a moment, something in your body relaxes. You think, okay, I'm not just surviving anymore. I've built something. I have a cushion. I have proof. I have options. And in a world where most people are one surprise bill away from panic, $100,000 does feel rich. Until you ask one very impolite question. Rich for what? Rich for a weekend? Maybe. Rich compared to your old self? Absolutely. Rich compared to the average emergency? Often, yes. But rich enough to replace work? That's where the illusion breaks. Because behind the curtain, the financial system does not think in terms of how hard it was for you to save that money. It doesn't care how disciplined you were, how many dinners you skipped, how many years you drove the same car, how many times you said no when everyone around you was upgrading their lives on credit. The system only cares what that money can buy over time. And that is a much colder calculation. This is the part nobody tells you when they glorify the first 100 grand. They tell you it's a milestone, and it is. They tell you it's the hardest to save, and in many ways it is. But they leave out the uncomfortable truth. $100,000 is emotionally huge and financially small. That gap is where a lot of people get confused. Because what you feel is victory. What the math says is, not yet. And once you understand why, you start to see retirement the way institutions see it. Not as a dream. Not as a vibe. Not as a beach photo in a brochure. As a liability. Retirement is expensive for one simple reason. It is the purchase of time, in retail quantities, with no paycheck coming in. That's the game. When you're working, your money doesn't have to fully support you. Your job is still carrying most of the weight. Your savings can sit there looking powerful because they're not being asked to perform the impossible. They're backup. They're stored labor. They're potential. The moment you retire, that changes. Now your money is no longer a symbol of security. It becomes an employee. It has to show up every month and do your job for you. Quietly. Reliably. Possibly for decades. And this is where $100,000 goes from looking massive to looking fragile. Because let's be brutally honest about what retirement actually costs. Not in fantasy terms. In real terms. Housing, food, utilities, insurance, transportation, dental work, prescriptions. The random expenses nobody puts in the spreadsheet because they don't happen every month, just often enough to wreck the year. Helping a child. Replacing a roof. Fixing a transmission. Paying for care when your body starts negotiating differently than it used to. Retirement is not one long vacation. It's adult life without wages. That distinction matters. People imagine retirement through the lens of escape. The industry prices it through the lens of duration. That's why the same $100,000 that feels like wealth at 42 can feel like a countdown clock at 67. If you pulled, say, 4% a year from $100,000, that's $4,000 annually. About $333 a month before taxes, before market swings, before inflation keeps nibbling at what your dollars can do. $333 a month is not retirement. It's a utility bill with confidence issues. Even if you push that number harder, even if you say, fine, 5%, 6%, let's be aggressive, the problem doesn't go away. Because the more you pull, the faster the base shrinks. And once you're no longer earning, shrinkage hits different. There is no next promotion to cover a bad year. There is no overtime. There is no bounce back through hustle. That's the hidden logic most people never see until it's late. Your savings feel rich when they're sitting still. They feel poor when they have to feed a future. And the future is expensive not because you're reckless, but because time is long. That's the insult. People think retirement planning is mostly about investment returns. It's not. Behind the scenes, it's largely a battle against longevity, inflation, and sequence risk, which is a sterile way of saying this. The order in which bad years happen can destroy a perfectly respectable plan. If the market drops hard in the first few years after you retire, and you're forced to keep withdrawing anyway because groceries refuse to care about market conditions, you're not just losing money. You're damaging the machine that was supposed to recover. You're pulling boards off the raft while still out at sea. And this is why the retirement industry loves big round targets. $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. Not because those numbers sound dramatic, but because the machine knows something emotionally inconvenient. Retirement is not funded by how rich you once felt. It's funded by how much income your assets can safely produce for a very long time. That's a different question entirely. $100,000 feels like wealth because it is hard to compare it to anything ordinary. Most everyday purchases are tiny next to it. Dinner is tiny. Rent is tiny in relation to it. A vacation is tiny. A new couch is tiny. Even a used car can feel tiny compared to a six-figure account. But retirement does not charge you in purchases. It charges you in years. And years are expensive. That's the reframe most people need. Stop asking whether $100,000 is a lot of money. Ask how many years of modest, dignified life it can actually buy. Now the glamour disappears. If your life costs $50,000 a year, $100,000 is 2 years before taxes and without assuming anything goes wrong. If your life costs $70,000, it's less. If inflation keeps moving the target, less again. If healthcare starts getting creative, less again. The number didn't shrink. The illusion did. And once you understand that, you also start to understand why so many working people with serious savings still don't feel safe. From the outside, they look fine. Good salary, decent house, retirement accounts, maybe even no consumer debt. On paper, they're ahead. But they know something the culture doesn't like to admit. Being ahead is not the same as being free. A lot of people hit 100,000 and think they've reached a different class of life. What they've really reached is a different class of anxiety. Before, the fear was immediate. Can I pay the bill? After, the fear becomes structural. Is this enough for the life horizon I'm actually heading toward? That fear is harder to talk about because it sounds ungrateful. How can someone with 6 figures save be worried? Easy. Because they're not comparing themselves to someone with less. They're comparing their pile of assets to the total cost of their remaining existence. And that comparison is ruthless. Here's how the system quietly trains confusion. During your working years, money is framed as accumulation. Save more. Hit milestones. Grow the number. Celebrate the account size. The dashboards are designed to make you feel progress through totals. Total balance. Net worth. Portfolio value. But retirement is not lived in totals. It is lived in cash flow. You do not eat net worth. You eat monthly income. You sleep under monthly income. You refill prescriptions with monthly income. So a person can be net worth proud and retirement poor at the same time. That's not a contradiction. That's how the game is built. And then there's inflation, the invisible editor that keeps rewriting what enough means. $100,000 would have sounded almost mythic to previous versions of you. That's partly because it used to carry more weight in the real economy. Today, it still matters. It still represents discipline. It still creates options. But its symbolic power has outpaced its purchasing power. The number remained culturally elite long after it stopped being functionally elite. That happens a lot in finance. Language lags reality. 6 figures still sounds like a rival because for a long time it was. But now? In many cities, 6 figures is not luxury. It's breathable. Sometimes barely. The same distortion applies to savings. 100,000 still feels like a fortress because our brains are attached to the old emotional meaning of the number. The system, meanwhile, has updated the price list. Quietly, brutally, without asking whether your identity has caught up. And that identity gap can make people do strange things. Some become overconfident too early. They hit 100,000 and unconsciously loosen up because they feel protected. Bigger apartment. Nicer car. More I deserve it spending. Not absurd choices. Just enough lifestyle drift to turn a real milestone into a decorative one. Others do the opposite. They become obsessed. They don't feel proud at all. They feel insulted by how small 100,000 suddenly looks against the total future. They start chasing higher returns, riskier bets, desperate acceleration. Because once the milestone stops delivering the emotional safety they expected, they want the next hit. This is another behind-the-scenes truth. People don't just need money. They need money to mean something stable. And retirement is where unstable meaning gets exposed. Because retirement is the first time many people are forced to translate status into survival. That's why the same executive who once felt powerful with a 7-figure salary can feel cornered by a retirement projection. Salary created the illusion of permanent altitude. Retirement asks a humiliating question. Strip away the title, the bonuses, the motion, the steady inflow of money. What remains? Can the assets stand on their own? For many people, not really. Or not at the level they got used to. And that's another thing nobody says clearly enough. What threatens retirement isn't just not having enough money. It's having a lifestyle that was designed around an active income stream and then trying to preserve it after the stream shuts off. That's where a lot of wealthy people discover they were only highly paid tenants in their own lives. They never owned the machine. They were renting it through work. The house, the routines, the expectations, the travel, the private school, the social circle, the identity of being the person who can pick up the check, replace the appliance, solve the problem with money. All of that may have been sustainable at high income and unsustainable at low withdrawal rates. So retirement doesn't just test your finances. It tests whether your life was built on durable foundations or expensive momentum. And institutions know this. That's why so much of retirement planning sounds conservative to the point of insult. Delay retirement. Lower expenses. Maximize tax-advantaged accounts. Reduce withdrawal rates. Plan for 30 years. Stress test healthcare. Downsize if necessary. Don't count on average returns. Don't assume your spending will drop as much as you think. People hear that and think, these planners are paranoid. No. They're just speaking from the backstage. They've seen what happens when optimism meets math. They've seen how quickly I have 100,000 saved turns into why does it still feel like I can't breathe? Because $100,000 is a great emergency fund. It is not, by itself, a retirement plan. That sentence sounds obvious when spoken out loud, yet emotionally, many people don't live like it's true. Partly because modern life trains us to react to numbers as symbols first and reality second. 100,000 in debt feels catastrophic because it is. 100,000 in savings feels victorious because it is. But both reactions are symbolic. The deeper question is always relational. Debt relative to income. Savings relative to future obligations. Assets relative to lifespan. Finance is not about numbers in isolation. It's about pressure over time. That's why a person with 100,000 in low expenses, flexible habits, modest housing, and a willingness to keep earning a little can actually be safer than someone with 5 times as much in a life structure that burns cash like a runway light. Money is not just a pile. It's a ratio. Freedom is not just a balance. It's the distance between what you need and what your assets can reliably produce. That's the number that matters. Not the screenshot-friendly one. The quiet one. How expensive is your existence? How fragile is your lifestyle? How many years does your money need to work? How much of your future depends on markets behaving politely? Those are the backstage questions. And they lead to a conclusion that can feel harsh, but is actually clarifying. If $100,000 feels rich to you, that's not stupidity. That's your nervous system correctly recognizing that you've escaped a lower level of danger. You have. That matters. It deserves respect. For many people, reaching that number required years of invisible discipline. It changed their margin for error. It gave them negotiating power. It reduced panic. It bought dignity. But dignity is not the same as permanent independence. That's the trap. 100,000 can absolutely change your life. It can stop desperation. It can give you leverage at work. It can let you leave a bad job without instantly imploding. It can turn emergencies into inconveniences instead of disasters. It can create investing momentum. It can buy time to think. Time to think is huge. But retirement doesn't ask whether you can buy time to think. It asks whether you can buy the rest of your life. And that is a completely different price. So maybe the real lesson isn't that $100,000 is small. Maybe the lesson is that we've been taught to use the wrong emotional yardstick. We measure wealth by accumulation milestones because they're easy to celebrate. The system measures wealth by resilience under duration. Can your money survive your future? That's the whole game. Once you see that, your goals start changing shape. You stop worshipping round numbers for their own sake. You start caring more about burn rate than bragging rights. More about flexibility than appearances. More about paid-off obligations than expensive symbols of success. More about steady investing than dramatic wins. More about how cheaply and sanely you can live than how impressive your income sounds at dinner. You stop asking, when will I feel rich? And start asking, what would make me hard to break? That's a better question. Because retirement is not really about becoming rich enough to stop working. For most people, it's about becoming structurally difficult to corner. Enough assets. Low enough obligations. Enough optionality. Enough margin that one bad market year, one medical surprise, one inflation spike, one family crisis doesn't immediately force your life into retreat. That kind of security is less glamorous than the dream we were sold. But it's real. And real is better than glamorous when you're 68 and the spreadsheet starts speaking in a more serious tone. So yes, having $100,000 saved feels rich. It should. It means you've done something most people struggle to do. It means you've built a buffer in a world designed to keep people financially exposed. It means you have proof that you can defer consumption, think long-term, and protect your future self at least a little. But don't confuse a strong position with a finished one. The system won't. It will keep sending bills. It will keep adjusting prices. It will keep making your money audition for the role of replacing you. And that's why the real flex was never the first 6 figures. It was learning to see past the emotional theater of the number and understand what it actually buys. Because the moment you stop being impressed by the pile and start respecting the runway, you stop playing a vanity game and start playing a survival game well. And in the end, that's the difference between looking rich for a moment and being free for a lifetime. One makes you feel safe. The other actually is.